Good morning. So, Proverbs chapter 30, verse 10. Do not malign a servant to his master, lest he curse you and you be found guilty. It's kind of the last one of a little section of Proverbs. And in short, we tattletale on others, yet maybe we're opening the door, not realizing there's probably a lot that they could tattletale about on us. So, yeah, let's maybe be slower to point out the faults of others and just focus on the work that the Lord is doing in us. Verse 11, there is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. There is a generation that's pure in its own eyes, yet it is not washed from its filthiness. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There is a generation whose teeth are like swords, whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among the men. So, a generation disobedient to parents, it curses and does not bless. Well, that's for 2 Timothy chapter 3, right? Verses 1 and 2, the last days, perilous times, and people will be disobedient to parents. I could get rabbit trailed easily, but that's the Proverbs for you. I have a friend who does a great job teaching on the subjects of parenting and marriage. And I've seen him, I think, more than once read through a list of sins, and it just talks about, they're murderers, they're revilers, they're drunkards, they're this, they're that. And then he goes and he's done, it's like, well, what thing did I skip off that list? And as you hear the list is pretty incriminating. And actually, again, it's multiple places. It's in 2 Timothy 3. It's in Romans 1. I believe even Galatians. It's a couple places. And so what's missing from my list? Well, if you hear, it's disobedient to parents. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother, a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. If you look at the history of America, there's actually been a series, let's go this way, it's more space on the camera, a series of revivals that have kind of helped bring the country back to where it needs to be. But more than once, our country has deteriorated to very low morals, and actually revival has brought our country back before. But if you listen to this, this is just food for thought for you parents out there. Romans chapter 1, so right after talking about people being given over to homosexuality, that's like in verse 27, right? 28, 29 now, filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, right? So here's this big list, starting off with people given over to homosexuality and sexual immorality, murder, right? Haters of God, proud, boasters, violent, but disobedient to parents is on there. And it's a good reminder for us, the parents, rather than pointing at the kids, point at the ones who are supposed to hold the kids accountable. And just remembering that, it's not cute, it's not silly, it's not just the oh man, it's just tough part of, disobedience to parents should be treated like all other sin. If your child is asked to pick up their blocks and they're sitting on the ground and they just look at you and then look back at the blocks and keep going, in all honesty, excuse my French, but if the kid just says, hey, go F off, like, whoa, you can't, they swore, they curse. Well, yeah, cursing's sin. And the same with ignoring the orders of their parents. That's the idea, is that they put disobedient to parents on the same list as murderers and all these other. So my friend just brings that up, and it's a great point that the Bible treats disobedience to parents along with all other wicked sins, and we should too. Hard part is that your kids usually aren't off murdering people, so you have to keep stopping them from murdering people again, or they're not off getting drunk. Maybe if they're older, that becomes an issue, but, I'm thinking the toddler. But disobedient to parents, it's a real sin issue that we are really in charge of. It's our job to help them through this sin issue. And before I move on, just think about this too. A great word of wisdom that you should just think about so you can pass it on to others at a future occasion is that if you could teach a child to control themselves in order to obey their parents, that life skill, how much will that become in handy later on in life when as adults they're struggling with self-control because there's sin that looks attractive, but they know they shouldn't be doing that. Well, their whole childhood they were taught to have self-control, and they were taught to do the right thing even when they didn't feel like it. I don't know about you, but I wish I still had more of that quality. Self-control and the ability to do the right thing even when I don't feel like it. That'd be kind of nice to have. More of, at least. And so that's the job of the parent, is really to teach their children self-control and the ability to obey despite their feelings. But there is a generation curses their father, does not bless its mother, and they think they're pure in their own eyes. And that's part of the problem, is that a lot of kids, again, if you get raised up and empowered, believing you're always right, believing you're always going to get your way, well, they're going to become very puffed up and think that, I'm the boss. But they're not. 13, they're lofty in their eyelids lifted up. Once again, it's, when kids don't have to work for stuff. It's not necessarily, this section is not necessarily about kids, but there is a generation. And just remember that as masses of parents follow suit with parenting methods, you're going to have a generation rise up with certain qualities, whether good or bad. One my wife and I are fearing, and you should be too, because they're starting to get out of the home. There is a generation, none of you guys, I'm looking at you guys watching, you're all old people. I'm joking, but your kids are old now. Your kids are getting out of the house, or most of them are, not little toddlers anymore. But the point is there's a generation today where the number one way these children are cared for is by putting some sort of an electronic device in their hands. And they're just continually watching stuff all the time. And the idea here, their lofty eyes, their eyes are lifted up. Again, it's a generation of people being raised with this crutch. And I'm curious to see how that's going to impact an entire generation. Because you go out and you see kids all the time plugged into their devices round the clock. Now, generation whose teeth are like swords, fangs like knives, and to devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among men. And back then, I think taking advantage of the poor and all the needy people, that was something that was really big. Ironically, these days, you don't see the youth, the college age, taking advantage of the poor. But what is funny is there is a lot of pushback of, hating the rich and the government and the corporations and the system. And so it's almost like the opposite these days. But it's kind of the same principle of this generation raised up with these skewed views on the world, and then they end up having their own view of how things should be and their solutions to the problems. And usually they're quite impractical solutions. Doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be worked on in those areas. But again, it's all about a generation being raised up with all these weird and different views. And so 11 through 14, I think it's good for us to remember that generations are made up of individuals and kids that are being raised by parents with the influence of grandparents. Get your grandkids to church. Get your kids to church. And if you want to really do the hard thing, which can really offend people, when you see kids acting out in ways you know are unbiblical, have the guts and the compassion to gently and tactfully see if you can offer any assistance to the parent. Might be easier if they aren't your grandkids, right? But just the idea of, hey, I see that little Johnny, is pretty frustrated there. How have you been working with him? Working with him? Yeah, like proactively helping him learn how to deal with his emotions and have self-control. And it doesn't mean it always works right away. I've got some of the exact, or not the exact same, but I mean, I'm dealing with some of the same personality qualities in my kids that I've been dealing with for over a year or more. But I'm continually addressing them. At least my kids can tell you what they are. They know what they are. They know they're not okay. Doesn't mean they're doing them less yet. But they at least know, yeah, this is unacceptable behavior, and I'm known to do it often. So pouring into our kids, it's so important. And I'll throw out the last but not least thing, because I've said this about marriage recently, but I'll say it now about children. Our children should be an evangelism tool. In that, when we go out in public, it would be amazing if our kids were different enough that people wanted to know, what's up with your kids? And you can tell them, well, we go to church, we serve the Lord, and we try to instill God's principles in our family. And this is the outcome. I don't actually feel that confident yet, but I've got a goal, right? That goal of kids that stand out amongst the crowd as being respectful, self-controlled, obedient, helpers, workers. It's a worthy goal. All right. God bless you guys. Have a great day. Sorry if I called anyone old. You know what I mean. Grandparent age of very little kids, because you're all very young grandparents if you're a grandparent. But all right. God bless you guys. You guys take care.